Is it wrong for my husband to demand sexy time even though I don't want to? Disclaimers is not my story time instead of me on Instagram. My husband and I have been married for 6 months. Unfortunately, our marriage was arranged by our families, and so far I have not been able to fall in love with him. I come from a very strict religion. My family and my husband's family believe that I should obey him, and it's been really hard for me to adjust to this. Before getting married, I had more freedom, but now I'm mostly home all day waiting for my husband to come home. I cook all of his meals and serve him while he's eating, and even if I'm not eating, he expects me to be sitting there with him. My husband is a very rich man, so he lets me go shopping whenever I want. But that's something I can't even do by myself. He always sends someone with me to go shopping. So I take advantage and buy really expensive designer things. Sometimes I spend $5,000 on a shopping day. This really never seems to bother him. Another thing I don't really like is that he rarely ever speaks to me. We have small talk every now and then, but we don't talk about important things, especially before we got married. We'd only seen each other a few times. I thought we'd have a really good relationship and be friends, but no. Sometimes I'll ask him what his day was like, and he just says it was fine. Other times I try to talk to him about his job, but he never really gives me a full answer. So honestly, I don't even know what he does. But my biggest problem with him is something else. He demands, you know what, sexy time. And I never really want to. I'm not in love with him and I'm not really attracted to him. On our wedding night, my family really pressured me into doing it. And it was horrible. And now whenever he wants it, I defend myself and it turns into a big fight. He even called my parents to complain. Part 2 is it wrong that my husband demands sexy time even though I don't want to? Disclaimer, this is not my story time instead of me on Instagram. That's when he called my parents and complained to them that I wouldn't do it with him. He took me to my parents' house the following day. My dad was really angry with me and told me that I needed to obey my husband. I told him I never wanted to get married to begin with and that I didn't love him or was even attracted to him. My parents clearly didn't understand me. I went home and my husband basically coerced me into doing it. And it's not even like it's fun. He doesn't do anything to please me. It's all about him when we're doing it. One night he asked me to do it and I refused. He got so angry he told me that he didn't need to ask for my permission. I basically punched him in the face and since then he hasn't touched me. But then I felt so responsible and I actually apologized. Even though I was just defending myself. Everything's back to the way it was. I just have to do whatever he wants. All our friends think that we're incredibly happy. I couldn't take it anymore, so I opened up to one of my best friends. I told her everything that was going on and she told me that I should just leave my husband. But with my religion and my family, it would be really hard to do that. Then she told me that I should just take on a lover. And the idea kind of stuck in my head. Let me backtrack a little. When I was in college, I had met somebody, but nothing ever happened because I knew my parents wouldn't accept him. I reached out to him on Facebook and asked him how he was, and he happened to be arriving to my city soon. I asked him if he wanted to meet up and he said yes. And what happens next is crazy. When we saw each other, we instantly fell in love. Part 3 is up. Is it wrong for my husband to demand sexy time even though I don't want to? Disclaimers in my story time instead of me on Instagram. When I saw my old friend, it was like love at first sight. I could tell he was so happy to see me and we talked for hours. And the only reason I was able to go was because I told my husband that I was going to hang out with my best friend. So my best friend wasn't actually even with me. After that, my friend, let's call him Rob. Rob and I hung out a few more times, and eventually I opened up to him about what was happening with my husband. I explained to him I had an arranged marriage and that I wasn't in love with my husband. He also told me that I should divorce my husband, but then he told me why. He said that since college he's always had feelings for me. That means he's had feelings for me for 3 years. Well, long story short, he's my lover now, and nobody knows. Only my best friend. We see each other 3 times a week. I always go when my husband's at work, and I tell him that I'm gonna be with my best friend. And Rob and I meet at his place, and I'm the happiest I've ever been. I know that this is totally wrong, but I'm finally living. Of course, my husband still demands you know what, but I'm able to bear it now because I know I have someone else who actually loves me. I know this can't last forever though. I wish I could just fall in love with my husband, but it's not that easy. He's always so demanding, and he doesn't understand that his behavior is not normal. And I barely speak to my parents now. I've only been seeing Rob for a month, but he's gotta go back home eventually. What should I do? Story time about how I'm in love with my sister's boyfriend and I think he likes me too. Actually, no, I know so because he kissed me 3 days ago. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sent to me on Instagram. The story I'm about to tell you guys is pretty bad, so please don't comment me in the comments. I swear I'm a good girl. A little backstory. My sister and I have never really gotten along. She's 3 years older than me and thinks she's the queen of the house. And she's always seen me as competition, which I hate. My mom would always try to make us get along, but it was totally impossible. My sister was always upset at something I did. Eventually, I stopped trying with my sister and I wouldn't make any effort to make her like me. Finally, last year she moved out and I was so happy. We celebrated my 20th birthday at home last year, and of course my sister came over. But she brought this really cute boy with her. Let me tell you guys, it was instant love at first sight. I can't even explain what I felt, I just knew that I liked him. Even my mom made a comment about how good looking he was. And can I just say that I caught him staring at me a few times throughout the dinner. After that, I never really saw him because my sister and I never hung out. Until my sister lost her job because of COVID and had to move back in with us. And this meant that I was seeing her boyfriend a lot more around our house. He was so nice to me. Anytime they wanted to watch a movie, he would always invite me. If they were going to go out to eat or go to the beach, he would always invite me. Eventually, I started saying yes, well, because I liked him. And something told me that he liked me too. And yes, I know it's totally wrong, but I just couldn't help myself. Whenever I knew he was going to come over, I would dress up and look really cute. I also had a pool in the backyard, so I would make sure I was in a bikini whenever he came over. I know this sounds bad, but it's gonna get worse. Well, guess what? Around this time, my sister actually got COVID. Thankfully, she didn't get really sick, but she was a little bit under the weather. And of course, she had to quarantine. So she basically stayed in her room and we all were on the other side of the house. Of course, her boyfriend, let's call him Mark. Mark would come over and bring her food sometimes. On one of these occasions, he asked me if I wanted to go to the beach with him and his friends the following day. He knew that I was totally bored because of quarantine, so I said yes. And guess what? He didn't tell my sister that he asked me and I didn't tell her that I said yes. So it was our little secret. The following day, I wore my sexiest bikini and we had a great time at the beach with his friends. While we were at the beach with his friends, I could tell that he kept staring at me. And he caught me staring at him too a couple of times. When we drove back to our house, he made a comment about how good I looked in the bikini. That's when I told him that he looked really good too. From then on, we started flirting all the time, making little comments, staring at each other, and he also started following me on Instagram. So I got to work posting sexy stories all the time, and it totally worked because he would reply to them. That's when I sent him a naughty picture. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I'm in love with my sister's boyfriend and he likes me too because he kissed me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So after flirting back and forth through DM, I finally sent him a cute naughty picture. I mean, not so naughty, but a little naughty. And that's when he sent me one back. Then he sent me a text message saying that he wished he had met me before he met my sister. And I told him I felt the exact same way. The following day, he came to visit my sister like he usually did. My sister had COVID at the time, so he would come every single day. At this point, my sister's quarantine was almost over. So I knew I either had to act fast or talk to him and tell him that we couldn't take things further. My parents had decided to go to our lake house, so I knew I had the house all to myself. And my sister couldn't come out of her room, so he and I were basically alone in the house. That's when he asked me if we could talk. We went to the backyard so that my sister wouldn't hear us, and he confessed that he really liked me, but he didn't know how to feel about it. He also told me he felt really guilty, and I totally understood him. He asked me what I thought we should do, and I just didn't have an answer. We just stared at each other for a second, and then he kissed me. And it was the most magical kiss of my entire life. We then proceeded to make out for about 10 minutes. After that, he told me we needed to make a decision. I told him the best thing for us to do was to just be honest with my sister. We went straight to my sister's room and told her everything. Of course, my sister being the drama queen that she is, she started throwing things around in her room, and she called my parents and told them everything. Mark got on the phone with my parents and told them that he was responsible for everything, but that he couldn't lie to my sister and that he had to be honest. And yeah, I felt even harder when he said that. That's when my sister had the bright idea to lie and say that she was pregnant and that he had to get married with her. Mark hesitated but said if that was true, then yes, they would get married. I told my sister I didn't believe her and that she needed to provide a pregnancy test. Mark went and got the pregnancy test, and of course, it came back negative. Mark went home and I got on the phone with my parents, and I told them that I would step aside for my sister's happiness. My parents told me that they thought it was the best thing. So I called Mark and told him that he needed to stay with my sister. Now my sister is trash talking me to all her friends, which I expected and I guess I deserve. But should I sacrifice my happiness and his? My sister won't let Mark and I talk at all. When he comes over, I completely ignore him. What should I do, you guys? Help. Story time about how I got caught hooking up with my stepson. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My husband actually cheated on his wife with me. I started working at his company when I was 18. We started an affair and I knew it was wrong, but at the time I was very broke. He offered me a wealthy lifestyle and believe it or not, we fell in love. So when he and I got married, I was still 18. He was much older than me. He was 42. Everyone in town, of course, started hating me because I broke up the family. His wife couldn't even see my face. My husband already had 2 kids when we got married. One was 12, one was 15. So they were much closer in age to me than he was. The kids and I got along super well. I was their cool stepmom and we had a lot of fun. When I turned 20, the oldest boy came to live with us. And I think you already know what happens. My husband was always traveling for work. That means my stepson and I would be home alone most of the time. One night we decided to watch a movie, and before I knew it, we were making out on the couch. From then, we basically started an affair behind my husband's back. Part 2 is up. Part 2 about how I got caught hooking up with my stepson. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said, my husband was always traveling for work. So my stepson and I would be alone in the house a lot. One night we were watching a movie and it just happened. After that, we couldn't get enough of each other. He even started skipping class so that he could spend more time with me. We basically turned into boyfriend and girlfriend when my husband wasn't there. When my husband would come home from his work trips, we would pretend like everything was normal. One day after my husband got back from one of his work trips, he found one of his son's socks in our bed. He asked me how it got there, but I told him it probably got stuck in there while I was washing the sheets. A few months passed by and my stepson and I are still hooking up. This is when I realized that I hadn't gotten my period in a few months. My period was always irregular, so I didn't think anything of it. My stepson went to the pharmacy to get me a pregnancy test. It came out positive. But the big problem is that my husband can't have children anymore. How was I going to explain this to my husband when he couldn't have kids? Part 3 is up. Part 3 about how I got caught hooking up with my stepson. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My stepson and I take the pregnancy test and it turns out it was positive. Well, I told my stepson that his dad wasn't able to have kids anymore. That's when he really flipped out. Then he tells me we should just tell his dad the truth. I told him let's not do anything until we actually confirm that I'm pregnant. We go to the doctor the next day, and it turns out I'm not pregnant. But this made me realize that we needed to end the affair. Once we got home, I told him we needed to break things off. He begged me not to, and we went to his bedroom. Not even 2 minutes later, his mother walks in. She catches us on his bed. She nearly has a heart attack, calls his dad, and tells him everything. She took him out of the house and told me never to see him again. When my husband came back from his trip, he made me promise not to see my stepson again. I told him we should get a divorce, but he said no. Then he confessed to me that he's been having an affair too. Now he doesn't even let me leave the house anymore. I want a divorce. What should I do?
Story time about how my high school principal tried to date me after I graduated. TW, if you think this is gross, don't watch. And disclaimers, is not my story time. It's been 10 years since this happened, but when I was in high school, I was really popular. I was in the cheerleading squad, the badminton team, the volleyball team, and drama club. All the teachers knew me and I got along with almost all the students. I never had any problems with girls or guys. My high school principal was a huge history buff, and so was I. One day I went to his office and asked him if I could start a history club. He was really impressed by this and he said yes. I started asking students if they wanted to join, and mostly it was only boys. And these were the boys that I knew had a crush on me, but I made a promise to my parents that I would focus solely on school and not boys. So that meant no boyfriends for me, and I was totally fine with that. I wasn't boy crazy or anything. I really just wanted to get into a good college and make my parents proud. After I formed the club, the principal asked me if he could sit in on some of the sessions. I said, of course. Our history club would get together every Wednesday, and he would always show up without fail. I mean, obviously, I thought that he was interested in history, and he just wanted to share this experience with us, but clearly I was wrong. After a few weeks, things were getting a little strange. When it was my turn to read, I would always notice him staring at me. And he also brought up the fact that there were only boys in the club. I explained to him that they probably just had a crush on me and that at least it was a way to get them into the club. He told me I needed to find girls because I was too much of a distraction for the boys. But the way that he said it just sounded like he was really jealous. I did my best to get girls in the club, but literally nobody wanted to join. After a few days, I realized that maybe the best thing for me was just to cancel the club. I was already in so many other clubs, and I didn't want to sacrifice my grades. I basically told the guys that we weren't going to have the club anymore, and they all said that was totally fine. But when I told the principal, he flipped out. He started yelling at me and told me that if I didn't keep the club going, that I would never make it in life. He said I wasn't being responsible and that I was letting down the club. So then I was basically forced into continuing the club. But then things got even stranger. He started showing up to every single get-together. And every time that it was over, he would ask me if he could walk me to my car. I mean, at first I thought he was just doing it so that I could be careful, I guess. But we were still on school property and I'm pretty sure nothing was gonna happen to me. That's when he started asking me if I had a boyfriend or if I liked any boys. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my high school principal tried to date me after I graduated. Trigger warning, if you find this subject gross, please don't watch. And disclaimer, this is not my story time. That's when my principal started asking me if I was dating any boys or if I had any crushes on boys. I obviously felt very uncomfortable when he asked me this, so I simply answered no. Then he told me that I could be honest with him. That's when I told him that I made my parents a promise because I was so close to graduating high school and avoid any distractions like boys. That's when he said that I was an amazing woman and that he wished more of the female students were like me. I quickly got in my car and went home. By the way, I was 2 months away from graduating from high school. Now this is when things start to get really weird. I started seeing him around everywhere in school. Our school is pretty big, but I kept bumping into him everywhere. Every time I would see him, he would be like, "Ho ho, are you stalking me?" I would laugh it off and continue walking. One day after history club, he asked me to come to his office with him. He said that he had a surprise for me. He took me to his office and gave me a book on history. I thanked him and tried to leave as quickly as possible, but then he said, "Don't you like it?" So I stood there having to pretend that I was happy that he gave me this book, when in actuality, it made me really uncomfortable. That's when he said that he had seen me in the library reading a book on World War II, and that he just wanted to surprise me with the same book. So this was already letting me know 2 things. Number 1, he's watching me around school and at the library. And number 2, I'm not noticing when he's watching me. I was so creeped out, but I managed to keep my cool. I said thank you again and basically ran away. For the rest of that week, I tried to avoid him as much as I could. I didn't go anywhere near his office, and I avoided the library, which was one of my favorite places in the school. At this point, graduation was only a week away. I was totally wrapped up in my studies that I actually forgot about the principal. Until one day I get a friend request from him on Facebook. At first I thought it was weird, but then I accepted because I figured, well, I'm graduating, so I'm not really going to be seeing him anymore. 5 minutes after I accepted his friend request, I get this really long message from him praising me, saying all these great things about me. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply said thanks. Finally, the day of graduation came and I was forced to see him face to face. That's when he told me that he actually had another gift for me. That's when he hands me an envelope with a blank check. He had the biggest smile on his face. I told him I couldn't accept it and he got mad. Part 3 of how my high school principal tried to date me after I graduated. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. After he hands me the blank check, I look at it and tell him that I simply cannot accept it. That's when he gets really angry, snatches the check from me, and tells me that he'll see me later. After the graduation ceremony, I was so happy and I was with my family. That's when he walks up behind me and asks me to keep the check. My family is watching this whole thing go down, by the way. I look at him and say thank you, but no. He then introduces himself to my family. But of course, he doesn't bring up the whole check thing. We all say goodbye and my family and I go have dinner. That very night, he sends me a message on Facebook again, saying that he shouldn't have given me the check. And he felt like he had crossed the line. I actually felt really bad, so I replied asking him to not feel bad. A week later, I get a text message from him. He said that he took the liberty of looking up my phone number and that he actually really wanted to speak to me. He asked if we could meet up for a coffee, and I said yes, unfortunately. We meet up at the coffee shop, and as soon as we sit down, he starts to confess his feelings for me. He said that I was basically his dream girl and that all he wanted was a wife like me. And he also asked me if I would ever consider dating him. I was actually too stunned to speak. As soon as he realized I wasn't saying yes, he asked me not to say anything, got up and left. I ran home and told my parents everything. My parents were really angry. My dad went straight to the cops. The cops told my dad that they had complaints from other students. He apparently did the same thing to them and asked them out once they graduated. And guess what? One of them said yes. The cops even investigated him after.
Story time about how I stole a famous celebrity's boyfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Growing up, I loved the fashion industry and loved clothes. I knew I wanted to make that my job in the future. And just to let you guys know, I'm not the prettiest girl. I'm not anything special in terms of looks, but I'm pretty funny and I have a really great personality. When I was 16, I moved to New York to become a fashion stylist, and I quickly started gaining traction. I became an intern at a really big fashion house, and this helped me a lot. As you can imagine, I started meeting a lot of celebrities and just really important people doing this. Although I never really got to style anybody, I was still in the room when they were there for fittings and different things. After a few years, I quit that internship and went into another company. This new company, I was getting paid more and I was just happier in general, and I was able to style a bunch of people on my own. I wasn't styling any celebrities or anything like that, but just basically people that worked in the industry and people that had different events to attend. But one day this celebrity comes in, and no, he's not an A-list or anything, but he's pretty famous. He came in with his girlfriend, who at the time was also famous. I basically had to style both of them for an event, and it was really fun. But here's the thing. Clearly, he thought I was really funny, and we were making jokes back and forth. The fitting took longer than usual because we had some pieces coming in, so we had to wait for them to come in for them to try it on. But she was clearly annoyed. Obviously, waiting around for clothes is not the most fun thing, but at the same time, we were giving them champagne, we ordered them amazing food, and she was literally getting her tushy kissed. I could tell that he was really embarrassed by her behavior. At one point, he even told her just to sit down and relax, which she did eventually. I left them alone for a few minutes before the clothes arrived. Once they arrived, I came in and I gave him the pieces. She literally ripped the dress out of my hand and went into the changing room. He looked at me and apologized and said, you know, she's just in a bad mood today. And I said, I totally understand. This was my job, so I knew I couldn't react any other way, but I wanted to slap her across the face. While she was changing, he started making small talk with me. I made a few jokes and it actually made him laugh, which I was really surprised. And then he even complimented me about what I was wearing. I mean, I did look really good. Once she came out of the dressing room, she started complaining right away about the fit. It didn't surprise me whatsoever, but at the same time, I just really couldn't believe how she was acting. Then I realized that she was probably jealous because he was talking to me. He was like going out of his way to talk to me. They finally left and he said bye. But 2 days later, he comes back by himself. He wanted me to style him for an event coming up that weekend. And that's when I realized I needed to take advantage of the situation. I had the feeling he liked me, but I wasn't going to come out and say it. So I turned up the charm 1000%. We talked for about 2 hours. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I stole a famous celebrity's boyfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So I knew I had to make my move now or it would be never. The fact that he came in 2 days later and by himself, that let me know that he liked me. Like I said in part 1, he was there for a few hours. We totally hit it off. We even talked about each other's families and what our favorite foods were. So that's when I asked him if he wanted to have a quick dinner. Trust me, I was so nervous to ask him, but I knew I had to do it. And he said yes. We finally got to the restaurant and sat all the way in the back. I kind of got the feeling that he didn't want anyone to see us, but it made sense. That's when I asked about his famous girlfriend. Then he quickly apologized for her behavior and told me that she's never really like that. And I told him that I'm used to being treated that way by celebrities. And he said that I didn't deserve that kind of behavior from her. That's when I asked him if he was happy with her. I could tell the question caught him off guard because he didn't really know how to respond. And that's when he told me that he was happy with her, but he didn't know if the relationship would actually go anywhere. We proceeded to have a few drinks, and I could tell this was really loosening us up. Out of nowhere, I grabbed his hand and kind of massaged it, but he didn't pull it away. That just confirmed the fact that he liked me. Then he asked me for my phone number. We said goodnight and went our separate ways. But for the next week, he texted me every single day saying good morning. Of course, we would text pretty much all day long. I finally decided to tell him how I felt, which he obviously already knew, and he told me that he felt the same. Then he was the one that asked me out and we actually went to the beach. We were at the beach for about 6 hours and we had such a great time. At the end of the beach day, I kissed him and asked him if he really wanted to be with his girlfriend. He stayed quiet and didn't answer, but the following day he messaged me and told me that he broke up with her. Here's the bad news. We only dated for 3 weeks. On the 3rd week, he actually broke up with me and told me he was dating someone else. I saw it coming. He's now dating another celebrity. The relationship isn't public yet, but I have a feeling they're gonna announce it soon. I keep texting him and asking him to take me back. I was actually falling in love with him. What should I do, you guys?
Story time about how I'm still in love with my toxic ex.
Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. This is really complicated, but please hear me out before you start judging me in the comments. Ex and I dated for exactly 1 year. When we first met, he was super charming, cute. I mean, he was like the perfect boyfriend. My family loved him, but gradually he started changing. The more serious we got about the relationship, the worse he became. For example, at the beginning of our relationship, we always used to hang out with our friends. And sometimes I would hang out with my own friends on my own. But 2 months into the relationship, he began guilting me. He would tell me that I would rather hang out with my friends, which wasn't even true, and then I would end up staying home and then he would go out with his friends. He would also tell my parents sometimes that I needed to be taught lessons, like how to respect men and stuff. My parents detested him. One time he came over for Thanksgiving and basically told me that I needed to go change my clothes. He even said that I looked like a whore in front of my cousin. After that, my cousin really hated him and began doing her own research. She found that he was liking girls' pictures on Instagram and that he was leaving dirty comments on their pictures. Once she found all this information, she told me and I confronted him. He told me that he had every right to comment on anyone's pictures because it was just the internet and it wasn't real life. I kind of had to accept what he said because I didn't want any more problems. I asked my cousin to stop searching stuff, but she just didn't let up. Almost every single week, she would send me screenshots of things that he'd comment on girls' pictures. Finally, I told my boyfriend that my cousin had found all this out, and he basically forced me to cut her out of my life. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would I stay with him? But when things were good, they were really good. He was super loving, affectionate. He always wanted to be with me, and he always prioritized going on dates and having fun. He would always surprise me with fun things. One time he planned this beautiful picnic, and we even stayed in the park and spent the night there. But then he would manage to ruin everything by becoming really jealous and controlling. My dream job was to work in marketing, and I just happened to land this internship at a really popular fashion magazine. When I told him I got the job, he acted really strange. He didn't even congratulate me. A few hours later, he told me that I was trying too hard, and that he didn't want a girlfriend that was going to be at work all the time. He also asked me how much I was going to be getting paid because he wanted to make sure it was less than what he earned. So in other words, he was jealous and envious at the same time. Then he insisted that I work around his schedule, so I could only work the days that he was working. Then he told me that if I wasn't spending enough time with him because of my new job, he would break up with me. I took that as the last straw. It was my dream job, but he was making everything terrible. While my entire family was so happy for me, I was crying in bed at night. The next morning, I woke up and texted him and told him that I didn't want to see him. He ran straight to my house. He got in his car to talk, and I proceeded to tell him everything I thought. Then he turned it all around and told me that I wasn't the girl that he fell in love with, and that if I didn't change, he would break up with me. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I'm still in love with my extremely toxic ex. After I told him that I needed him to change, he basically turned everything around and told me that I wasn't the girl that he fell in love with anymore, and that I was the one that needed to change if I wanted to continue in the relationship. And to top it all off, he kicked me out of his car. We didn't speak for about 2 weeks. During that time, I started at my dream job, and everything was actually going pretty well. I didn't have the pressure on top of me about him not wanting me to work, and my life was actually getting better. My skin started clearing up, and I even started losing weight. In other words, I was really happy. My parents and family were were so happy too. But then I see that he starts posting other girls on his Instagram. I knew that he was doing it on purpose, so I tried not to get upset, but I just couldn't help it. Then I made a huge mistake. I messaged him and asked him if he still loved me. Then he called me and we talked on the phone for about 4 hours. By the end of the phone call, we were back together. And guess what? We even agreed to moving in together. I made him promise that he wouldn't be jealous anymore and that he would stop trying to control everything I did. He promised up and down that he would never be that way again. But literally 3 days later, he comes over super drunk, demanding you know what. I said no because my parents were home and I wasn't going to do that in the house with them. Then of course he starts threatening me again, saying that if I don't do it, I don't love him and blah blah blah. So I took advantage and I kicked him out of the house. Then he sent me an essay of a text message breaking up with me and telling me how he doesn't love me anymore. It's been 2 months since that happened. Once again, I'm doing great at work. My family and I are super happy, but I actually miss him. Not only do I miss him, I'm so jealous all the time because I see he's posting girls on his Instagram. I miss being with him and I miss having fun with him, but I don't miss always feeling scared and nervous. I even tried dating a few guys, but nobody compares to him. A few weeks ago, I went on a date with this really nice guy. We connected and went on a few more dates. I posted on my story that I was on a date and my ex went crazy. He actually showed up at the restaurant and told me to come out and talk to him. And I did. I literally left the guy that I was on a date with to go speak to my ex. He told me to leave with him and I said no. He grabbed my purse and threw it on the ground and told me that he would never speak to me again. 3 days later, he was back in my messages begging to see me. But the guy that I was on a date with actually really likes me and asked me to be his girlfriend. I don't know what to do. Love my ex and I want to get back with him, but I know he's crazy. But this new guy's really nice and really caring. What do I do?
Story time about how I faked being pregnant for 6 months. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I'm in my late 20s and I have a really successful career. I make plenty of money, I own my own house, and I have 2 cars. But I've always failed in relationships. I had a long-term relationship in my early 20s, but I broke up with him because he just wasn't pulling his weight. I paid for our extravagant lifestyle. He would basically help me with my work and then expect me to pay him. Also, I paid the rent, I paid for the cars, and I paid for every single dinner date we ever had. We also had a joint bank account, which was a huge mistake on my part, because ultimately I was the one earning all the money. After 4 years of dating, I decided to break up with him and I told him to move out of my house. I felt free and I started dating right away. I met this guy one night and he was amazing. He complimented me all the time and made me feel really good about myself. But here's the problem, I tend to fall in love really easily. After that night, that guy and I would talk every single day. He would come over to my place and we would have dinner, but the good thing about this guy was that he had his own money and he was pretty wealthy. His family was also really well off. I totally saw myself marrying this guy, but then eventually we broke up. I found out that he was cheating on me, but also he was doing some illegal stuff in the background. I decided to forgive him for the cheating and everything, but he still wanted to break up. I mean, I was totally shocked because I was forgiving him, but he had no intention of being in a committed relationship with me. So once again, I was single. I decided not to focus on guys at all. Instead, I started going out with my friends and focusing on my career. But you know how it goes. When you're not looking for love, it just knocks on your door, which it kind of literally happened like that. I had some friends come over and they decided to bring some other people that I didn't know. There was one guy that showed up and I knew of him because he was friends with my other friends. He was really cute and we hit it off right away. He asked me out on a date, but I kept saying no because I just didn't want to get into anything. But he really won me over with his personality and I ended up saying yes. And after our first date, I literally thought I was falling in love with him. Like, here I go again. This time I knew that if I got into a relationship with this guy, he had to marry me. So early on in the relationship, I told him that my intention was to marry him, and if his intention wasn't to marry me, then we needed to stop dating. He promised me up and down that he did want to marry me, so I stayed in the relationship. I knew that I wanted him to move in right away, which I know sounds crazy, but I was kind of desperate at this point. My goal in life was to have kids, and I just wasn't getting there. It took me about a week to convince him to move in, and he finally said yes. But he basically told me that he wanted to continue living his life the way he had been before. In other words, he wanted to continue hanging out with his friends whenever he wanted, and I said fine. I was just happy he was committing to something. Then I realized I had to get pregnant in order to tie him down. Part 2 of how I faked a pregnancy for 6 months in order to keep my boyfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. After I finally convinced him to move in, I knew that I needed to get pregnant as soon as possible. My goal in life is to be a mom, and because I had so many failed relationships, I knew that I needed to make this one work.
The first 2 months of living with my boyfriend were really good, but of course I quickly wanted to get pregnant. I also knew that the only way he would marry me was if I got pregnant, so I got to work. I stopped taking the pill and I didn't tell him, which I know sounds terrible, but here's the problem, I was not getting pregnant. I was off the pill for 3 weeks and nothing happened. I got so desperate, I went to the mall and got a pregnant woman to pee on a stick, which of course came out with a positive result. I went home that night and showed my boyfriend the stick, and he was so surprised. He asked me if I was taking the pill, which I said yes, but he got really upset and told me that I probably got pregnant on purpose, which I denied. But then he said the magical words. He said, "I guess we have to get married now." I was so beyond happy, but the problem was that I really wasn't pregnant. So I started gaining weight like crazy. Anytime he left the house, I would eat tons of junk food. I would go late at night to the supermarket and buy tons of junk food. I get Doritos, chips, cookies, and cake and ice cream. I basically ate anything that was sugary. 2 months later, I had gained about 30 pounds, and it looked like I was really pregnant. But my relationship started to fall apart. My boyfriend was upset all the time, blaming me for having gotten pregnant. 6 months into my fake pregnancy, he decided to break up with me. I begged him, but he said he didn't want to be with me and that he needed to be free. That's when I dropped the whole charade and told him I wasn't pregnant. He literally blew up in my face. He actually grabbed a chair and threw it into the TV. He grabbed his stuff and ran away. Of course, he blocked me from everything, so I couldn't contact him. 3 days later, 2 of my cars had been stolen from my driveway, and part of me knew that it was him. But a week after that, he actually reached out and asked me if I wanted to try at the relationship again. But here's the thing, he doesn't have much money, so he can't live the lifestyle I was giving him. I'm pretty sure he only wants to come back because of the money, but I kind of still love him. What should I do?
Tender touch, drunk love, staying up, just talk to you. You stayed in touch, 2 continents, through all odds. Seems every night, yeah, all the time I'm calling out to you. Seems every time I take a drink, I'm reaching out for you.
Story time about how my best friend's dad tried to assault me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I'm now 24, but 10 years ago, a new girl moved into our town. Her and I quickly became best friends in school. She would always come over to my house and have dinner with me and my parents. My parents really grew to love her because she was so polite and really cared about me. The only thing was that she never wanted me to go over to her house. At first, I thought it might be because she was embarrassed of her house or something. And eventually I asked her, and she told me that her dad was abusive towards her mom, and that was the reason why she didn't want me to come over. I felt terrible that she had to live like that, so I expressed to my mom that I was really concerned about her. So my mom actually asked my best friend if she wanted to come live with us for a little bit. Let's call my best friend Sarah. Sarah said no because she wanted to be with her mom. But my mom really wanted to help Sarah and her mom. My mom was in an abusive relationship herself when she was younger, so she understood what Sarah and her mom were going through. My mom decided to invite Sarah's mom over for dinner. That's when my mom asked her about their living situation, and Sarah's mom confessed that it was pretty bad. My mom suggested that she should try to get a divorce, and a few weeks later, she filed for divorce. We were all so happy because this meant things would get better for Sarah and her mom. And things did get better. Her dad moved out to his own apartment, and a few weeks later, he had a new girlfriend. I was able to stay over at Sarah's house, and it was really fun. One of the times that I was with Sarah at her house, her dad showed up. But he started making me feel really uncomfortable. He told Sarah that I was the prettiest friend she'd ever had. I could see him staring at me. After he left, Sarah apologized. I went home and tried not to think about it. A few days later, I was walking home when Sarah's dad pulled up next to me. Part 2 is up. 2 of how my best friend's dad tried to assault me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. One day that I was at Sarah's house, I decided to walk home instead of calling my mom to pick me up. As I was walking home, Sarah's dad pulls up next to me. At this point, I still hadn't forgotten what he had said about me, and I still felt really uncomfortable. He asked me if I needed a ride, and I politely said no. Then he started to laugh and asked me if I was scared of him. Of course I said no, but the truth is that I was. And he said, well, then get in the car if you're not scared of me. And I did. As we got closer to my house, he put his hand on my lap. He asked me if I had a boyfriend, and I pushed his hand away. Then he asked me why I was being so rude. I told him that he made me feel uncomfortable, that I just wanted to get out of the car and walk the rest of the way home. He said no because it would be dangerous for me to be by myself walking at night. He put his hand back on my lap and told me that I was really sturdy. That's when he grabbed my hand and tried to put it on his lap. Of course, I pulled my hand away really quick. Then he pulled over really fast and tried to kiss me. I was so beyond disgusted. I just started yelling, and this really took him by surprise because he must have thought that I was just gonna let him. While I was yelling at the top of my lungs, I managed to unlock the car and open the door. I basically threw myself on the ground, and he started yelling at me, telling me to shut up. He tried to pull me back into the car, but at this point I was laying on the ground, so he had to pick up dead weight. He grabbed my foot and started pulling me back towards the car, but I started kicking him. He told me that I was overreacting and that he was just trying to be friendly. Luckily, a few of the neighbors heard me screaming because I was right in front of their house. They came outside and ran towards me because they saw me struggling with him. That's when the woman said that she was going to call the cops. He tried to tell the lady that I was overreacting and that he had only leaned over to put the seatbelt on, but I took it the wrong way. I told her that he tried to kiss me and she started calling the cops. That's when he drove away. I literally could not believe what had just happened. Finally, the cops arrived and so did my mom. I told them everything that happened, and I even told them that he had made a comment about me in Sarah's house a few days before that. They quickly started looking for his car and found him at a parking lot. They arrested him and he spent 2 nights in jail. His girlfriend then went to bail him out. She told the cops that he was with her and that I was just lying and that I made everything up. She even went as far as to tell the police that I had been hitting on him and that she had been a witness to it. She would even call my house at 2 in the morning and hang up. I even saw her car near my house and by my school, which means she was following me. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how my best friend's dad tried to assault me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I called the police to tell him that his girlfriend was following me. That's when the cops said that I could probably get a restraining order against him and his girlfriend. Sarah and her mom came over to our house after they heard what happened. Of course, they felt really bad, but they weren't surprised. Sarah told me that that's why she never wanted me to come over because her dad had commented things about her friends before. Worst of all is that they couldn't keep him in jail for what he did to me, but a few months later he was finally put into prison because of something else he did. Apparently he had tried to steal a car or something. Remember the crazy girlfriend I told you Sarah's dad had? She kept following me for a long time. She would even show up to my school asking me if I wanted a ride home. Eventually I was able to get a restraining order against her, but she was really scary. A few years ago she tried to follow me on Instagram. I had to block and report her. I mean, what kind of woman would fight for a man like that? The good news is Sarah and I are still good friends to this day. We even went to college together and now have steady boyfriends. Even Sarah's mom remarried and she's really happy with her husband. I look back at what happened as a learning experience, but to be honest, if he ever gets out of prison, I'm scared.
Story time about how I'm in love with my sister's boyfriend and I think he likes me too. Actually, no, I know so because he kissed me 3 days ago. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. The story I'm about to tell you guys is pretty bad, so please don't comment me in the comments. I swear I'm a good girl. A little backstory. My sister and I have never really gotten along. She's 3 years older than me and thinks she's the queen of the house, and she's always seen me as competition, which I hate. My mom would always try to make us get along, but it was totally impossible. My sister was always upset at something I did. Eventually, I stopped trying with my sister and I wouldn't make any effort to make her like me. Finally, last year she moved out and I was so happy. We celebrated my 20th birthday at home last year, and of course my sister came over, but she brought this really cute boy with her. Let me tell you guys, it was instant love at first sight. I can't even explain what I felt, I just knew that I liked him. Even my mom made a comment about how good looking he was. And can I just say that I caught him staring at me a few times throughout the dinner. After that, I never really saw him because my sister and I never hung out. Until my sister lost her job because of COVID and had to move back in with us. And this meant that I was seeing her boyfriend a lot more around our house. He was so nice to me. Anytime they wanted to watch a movie, he would always invite me. If they were gonna go out to eat or go to the beach, he would always invite me. Eventually, I started saying yes, well, because I liked him. And something told me that he liked me too. And yes, I know it's totally wrong, but I just couldn't help myself. Whenever I knew he was gonna come over, I would dress up and look really cute. He also had a pool in the backyard, so I would make sure I was in a bikini whenever he came over. I know this sounds bad, but it's gonna get worse. Well, guess what? Around this time, my sister actually got COVID. Thankfully, she didn't get really sick, but she was a little bit under the weather. And of course, she had to quarantine, so she basically stayed in her room and we all were on the other side of the house. Of course, her boyfriend, let's call him Mark, would come over and bring her food sometimes. On one of these occasions, he asked me if I wanted to go to the beach with him and his friends the following day. He knew that I was totally bored because of quarantine, so I said yes. And guess what? He didn't tell my sister that he asked me and I didn't tell her that I said yes. So it was our little secret. The following day, I wore my sexiest bikini and we had a great time at the beach with his friends. While we were at the beach with his friends, I could tell that he kept staring at me. And he caught me staring at him too a couple of times. When we drove back to our house, he made a comment about how good I looked in the bikini. That's when I told him that he looked really good too. From then on, we started flirting all the time, making little comments, staring at each other, and he also started following me on Instagram. So I got to work posting sexy stories all the time, and it totally worked because he would reply to them. That's when I sent him a naughty picture. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I'm in love with my sister's boyfriend and he likes me too because he kissed me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So after flirting back and forth through DM, I finally sent him a cute naughty picture. I mean, not so naughty, but a little naughty. And that's when he sent me one back.
Then he sent me a text message saying that he wished he had met me before he met my sister, and I told him I felt the exact same way. The following day, he came to visit my sister like he usually did. My sister had COVID at the time, so he would come every single day. At this point, my sister's quarantine was almost over, so I knew I either had to act fast or talk to him and tell him that we couldn't take things further. My parents had decided to go to our lake house, so I knew I had the house all to myself, and my sister couldn't come out of her room, so he and I were basically alone in the house. That's when he asked me if we could talk. We went to the backyard so that my sister wouldn't hear us, and he confessed that he really liked me, but he didn't know how to feel about it. He also told me he felt really guilty, and I totally understood him. He asked me what I thought we should do, and I just didn't have an answer. We just stared at each other for a second, and then he kissed me. And it was the most magical kiss of my entire life. We then proceeded to make out for about 10 minutes. After that, he told me we needed to make a decision. I told him the best thing for us to do was to just be honest with my sister. We went straight to my sister's room and told her everything. Of course, my sister, being the drama queen that she is, she started throwing things around in her room, and she called my parents and told them everything. Mark got on the phone with my parents and told them that he was responsible for everything, but that he couldn't lie to my sister and that he had to be honest. And yeah, I felt even harder when he said that. That's when my sister had the bright idea to lie and say that she was pregnant and that he had to get married with her. Mark hesitated but said if that was true, then yes, they would get married. I told my sister I didn't believe her and that she needed to provide a pregnancy test. Mark went and got the pregnancy test, and of course, it came back negative. Mark went home and I got on the phone with my parents, and I told him that I would step aside for my sister's happiness. My parents told me that they thought it was the best thing. So I called Mark and told him that he needed to stay with my sister. Now my sister is trash talking me to all her friends, which I expected and I guess I deserve. But should I sacrifice my happiness and his? My sister won't let Mark and I talk at all. When he comes over, I completely ignore him. What should I do, you guys?
Am I the asshole for wanting my mom to be in the delivery room when my wife has our baby? My wife, Alice, 28 female, is 7 months pregnant. She's starting to think about who she'd like to have in the delivery room when the time comes. She said she would really like her dad there for support. Alice is really close with her dad since she was a kid and has only grown closer to him since her mom died, so that was no surprise. I'm completely fine with having Doug there. She said she doesn't want her stepmom there, which is fine. Her stepmom is really sweet, has been so helpful through the entirety of the pregnancy, and I know she will be hurt when she finds out she can't be there, but I can understand. The issue I have is that Alice doesn't want my mom there. My mom has never been my wife's biggest fan, but she is so excited to have a grandchild and has been planning on being in the delivery room the entire pregnancy and likely before. Like I said, my mom has been hard on Alice and can be a little judgmental, but she's still the grandmother of our child and wants to be there. She's also my mother, and I find it unfair she can have her dad there, but I can't have my mom there. It's a high-risk pregnancy, and Alice has been really adamant about trying to give birth naturally, but she claims that if things take a turn and she wants an epidural or there needs to be an emergency C-section for whatever reason, she is worried about the judgment from my mom because my mom has openly expressed her distaste for both. Additionally, she says my mom is not the nicest to her. I know my mom has been a little harsh about her weight gain, even though about 30 pounds. She was 120 before. Allegedly, when my wife went over to my parents' house recently, she dropped a plate on the floor, and my mom yelled at her while she made her get down on the floor and clean it up.
Oh my gosh.
I understand where Alice is coming from, and while she'll be the one giving birth, he is my child as much as hers, and I feel like I should be allowed to have my mom there. My wife and I got into a scuffle about this before she started crying, and the issue was dropped. She told me that I was being selfish.
If you can solve this riddle, you're a genius. There was this woman and she was a serial killer. She would take men on dates and then poison them and kill them. One day, she goes on a date with you. Ooh, but she can't go through with it because she's so in love with you. Eventually, you two end up getting married and you buy a house together. When you buy the house, she claims the basement for her work and she says that you're not allowed to go down there. You say okay and you're happily married. But as time goes on, you get really curious and one day she leaves for work and you decide to go downstairs and see what's down there. When you go downstairs, it's pitch black and you reach around the walls to see if there's a light switch to turn on, but there isn't. As you're feeling around the room, there's a light bulb above you that is unscrewed a little bit. You screw it in a little bit more to turn on the light. Immediately, you see all the dead bodies that she's ever killed and you're in shock as you're looking around for a while, but then you hear her car pull up in the driveway and she's home from work. You quickly unscrew the light bulb, run upstairs, and sit down. When she gets home, she goes downstairs to check on her dead bodies, and she immediately knew that you were in there. How did she know? Pause this video right now because I'm about to say the answer. It was because the light bulb was still hot.
This is why you should never date multiple people at once. A story time, I guess. This story takes place when I was 17 or 16. Okay, no one cares. It was a long time ago. And girl, back in the day, I was getting played left, right, and center. Played like a game of football. I had a distinct taste for F-boys. And that was going on for some time until your girl said enough. Enough of this buffoonery. I'm not getting played by men any longer. And I am going to become a player myself. I know the logic is really off, but I was 17, so cut me some slack, okay? So my brilliant idea was, I'm just gonna talk to multiple guys, and I will figure out which one I like in the end. And I'm gonna date that one. Now in my mind, the plan was flawless. And they do always say, don't put your eggs in one basket. So I end up meeting a couple of guys. I really like this one guy, but I decide I'm keeping my options open. Already posted part 2, so go watch it. This is why you should never date multiple people at once. Part 2. So I was talking to like 4 guys, and I literally did not like them. But I was determined to keep my options open. I just didn't want another guy to play me. As the time progressed, me and this one guy, the one I really liked, started actually like dating. I mean, we didn't define the relationship, but it looked like a relationship. In my head, you have to like define the relationship. In my man's, he's not doing that. I even met his mom. Now, this is where it gets truly embarrassing. So one day I'm getting drinks with one of those other 3 guys, even though I'm basically in love with this guy. And we're sitting in this cafe, having a good old time. And who walks in through the door? The mother of the guy I want to date. I should have saw this coming, but I was dumb. So my heart dropped, and she freaking waved at me. Like, I see what you're about. And needless to say, she told him, and me and the one guy I really liked never talked again.